I'm going to tell you about my worst manuscript rejection. If you want to succeed in traditional publishing and get a book deal for your memoir, don't do what I did with my first manuscript. These painful tales still bites to recount because it really was one of those moments when I could have given up on myself. But what it taught me is why I'm so passionate about teaching the memoir publishing genre specifically and helping authors reach their potential. Because memoir writing is you, so rejections, critiques and feedback like this hurt badly. The thing is, if you listen to conventional wisdom about writing a book draft and apply that to memoir, going to workshops, joining critique groups, sending your pages to people as you're still writing the draft, it's going to derail you completely. It will add years to your publishing timeline, and it will mean that you abandon your book after something like this happens. So I'll share a very personal story from my own experience so that you understand how this plays out. So I studied for 5 years academically, writing. I also had lots of things published, but I'd never published a book when I started the first draft of what became Love and Other U-Turns. At that point, despite being a published journalist, I knew little about memoir, let alone the craft of structuring the narrative and how it differs from general nonfiction and reportage. If you've downloaded my secrets to best-selling memoir pitches, all I had was the fourth piece in that process. But I was so motivated to get published and honestly so desperate for someone just to validate my story and read this thing I'd spent months in the writing cave drafting that I sent the draft to a publisher from one of the top 5 commercial book publishing companies in the world. This publisher had been the name behind some of our biggest publishing successes in the travel memoir genre. And I was just shocked when she contacted my agent to say she wanted to meet me. I told my friends, I told my family, I was expecting to get a book deal at this meeting. Why else would she want to meet me? This was a logical assumption to make she'd read my book. Instead, for over an hour, this publishing executive told me in painful, crushing detail why my manuscript was terrible and would never be published. If I'd known that was coming, I wouldn't have reacted so badly. But I just assumed that selling a memoir was like selling a nonfiction because that's all I'd done. And this rejection slaughtered me. And this is the thing, you must know what sells in the genre before you write or pitch your memoir. Make sure you download my pitch guide if you don't have it yet. I'd studied writing and literature academically for 5 years. I did a literature degree followed by postgraduate in professional writing and editing. But neither of these programs taught me the specifics of mastering memoir, let alone getting it published. Memoir is quite a new genre, and there's a lot of conservative writing courses that don't value it, let alone teach you how to write it. So anyway, back to my rejection. I devoted so much time to writing this manuscript and getting an agent, time which I'd sacrificed for more practical pursuits like paid work because I was determined to master this. Getting a traditional book deal was my #1 life dream. I'd gone all in. I'd lived off savings to finish the draft in order to keep my head in the story and spend the necessary time and attention on the project. So sitting there, having the top person in memoir publishing in Australia at the time reject my manuscript suddenly made my decision and determination to succeed and bravely pitch this book feel like the most stupid thing in the world. To have a publishing professional not just read my memoir but then tell me it was completely unpublishable wasn't just disappointing, it was sickening. This woman knew memoir. She published the genre, and mine was bad. I was humiliated. I didn't want to look at the manuscript and I abandoned the draft. The crush to my confidence and self-belief was almost like a physical wound. I felt like my creative instincts were wrong, my storytelling was absolutely crap, and my goal was not possible. I even lost my self-belief there, and it's not a healthy headspace. Her position as an expert, and an editor made the critique even worse. But here's the thing, when you get feedback on a memoir, it's your story. So it's like you're getting feedback on you, which is why it's so painful. And yet this is what many writing programs, coaches and courses teach, that you will only write a good memoir if you get critiques, workshop the draft with 10 other writers, or hire a one-on-one book coach or developmental editor. Consuming and confusing, it can actually throw you off. Memoir writing makes you vulnerable because you have to go really far inside yourself to not just tell the story on the page, but assign meaning to it. Memoir writing is really about you and you only, and this is important. People who say memoir is an easy genre to write because it's non-fiction have obviously never written one. When you write memoir, you expose yourself and your inner workings. What could be more intimate than that? It's the simplest way to describe it. Yes, it's only one part of your life, but it's your life. So to have feedback on that draft when you're that early in the process and don't know how to assess whether or not it's publication worthy on your own is frankly dangerous. I also think that if your memoir has a strong hook, which means it's even more sellable, i.e., very unique, it's more likely, even more vulnerable. I talk about this in my free pitch guide. These are intense life choices and experiences that we're exposing on the page. So when someone critiques this honesty and bravery and you don't have the foundational principles of memoir structure and mindset nailed down, you feel like it's not your writing that's terrible, but that you're actually a terrible person. So it's dangerous. Back to my worst rejection and what you can learn from it. I knew that if I could bear it, I should record what the criticism was and try to separate it from what I felt she was saying about me for when I did pick the draft up again. Because remember, this publisher knew memoir. She knew her stuff. So in my notes from the meeting, I learned her rejection of the manuscript was for 2 reasons. And these are 2 reasons I've since learned are really the common reasons that most memoirs are rejected after they've made it past the pitch. So save yourself a brutal critique group and write these down. First, I started the story in the wrong spot. Most memoir writers do. This is because to write the story, you need to find your way into the story. That part, the backstory, does not go into the manuscript. This is fundamental to writing a compelling memoir. You must know story structure. Every best-selling memoir starts in the thick of things, not with the backstory of all that led you to make that decision. Secondly, the reason that my manuscript was rejected, and most memoirs are, is because no one could relate to the story or the characters placed within it. The most important thing to remember in memoir is nobody is interested in you. And this is quite freeing because it helps you remember that people who read your book aren't thinking about you. Because basically, people want to read about a relatable aspect to your story or experience on one of those 4 universal themes that matter to the human condition. Understanding compelling story structure and the concept of relatability is fundamental to writing a memoir that will sell. And if you don't know how to achieve these things with your manuscript, like I didn't, because memoir was not taught at university in writing courses to me, I teach you this process, and it's exactly why I created the Art of Memoir. Now for the happy ending to my rejection. After I devoted myself to learning how these 2 aspects that I got wrong worked, I put my head down, I redrafted the manuscript in a few months, and when I pitched it to a publisher, I had a book deal within weeks. Love and Other U-Turns, my first memoir, was published the following year. With A Letter from Paris, my second memoir, knowing this process and how and why memoir drafting is different to other genres helped me write that draft in 5 months for my publisher. Here's what I did not do with the manuscript that everyone tells you to do. I did not send the draft to other writers for feedback, even fellow memoir writers. I didn't pay for critiques or editorial reviews or get anyone to read my chapters or outlines. All I had was the pitch and the sample chapters I'd sent, and I used this to guide me. I'd workshopped the pitch with a few people who knew me, but that was all I sent anyone. And I knew how dangerous feedback is with memoir, how precious your focus and your headspace is to write it well. You have the process and the right understanding of the conventions of the genre. You don't need feedback. I know it's a big, bold statement, but feedback is helpful in the query process because that's when you're pitching. But in the writing process, it's particularly dangerous because of why memoir is so unique and difficult. It could be about trauma. When you write a memoir with an understanding of the story structure, the metaphor, the meaning of events and story, you can create this meaning and totally transform the way that you see your life and your experiences. But if you're workshopping that and asking people for their opinions when it's still forming itself in your head and that powerful process of transformation internally, which is why memoir is so valuable, it just doesn't work. So this is why I don't teach you instead how to actually transform this experience into a compelling and relatable narrative while you still get to experience those powerful feelings and internal transformations.